be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he.' And they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. But this is the beginning of the birth pangs." The word of the Lord. Hannah, who is the central character in our Old Testament passage today, is thought of as a woman of faith, patience, and kindness. She put up with the taunts of her sister, and as far as we know, never retaliated. She put up with perhaps well-meaning, but her clueless husband, who seems to have missed the part in social status in ancient society that to be a childless woman meant that you were shamed and considered useless and worthless, regardless of if you had a loving husband, which she did. Hannah has initiative. She goes to the temple and prays to God for help. And then she even has to talk back to the priest, Eli, who mistakes her devout passion for drunkenness. Hannah is an extraordinary woman. In the face of body shaming and jealousy, able to maintain her dignity in suffering, and to exhibit clarity in the face of wrongful accusation and injustice is simply extraordinary in any culture or any age. Now, what I don't want to do today is add to the pile of interpretations that make Hannah just a game piece on some board game of history, because it can be an example of bad theology that says, pray to the ATM God and miraculously you get your heart's desire. Hannah's actions, her vow, and her son Samuel all play an important part in the tradition in Israel, the transition in Israel from one political structure to another, from an age of judges to an age of kings. Israel at the time was vulnerable. Both church and state were in turmoil and lacking good and wise leadership. And the turning point, I think, comes from Hannah, the one who was good and wise and faithful. She plays an important role in the history of our ancestors in faith. But before we get to all that, we have Hannah suffering, wanting a child and not having one. Then and now, for all sorts of reasons, a woman who wants to have a child and is unable to experiences sometimes a crippling grief and loss. Before we can get to Hannah's role in history, we have this deep grief. And then we see her experience the injustice of wrongful accusation, having to overcome social labels in order to be taken seriously, for her voice to be heard, for her life to be given value and worth. She may be honored today, but in her day, she decidedly was not. Hannah's experience, to a significant degree, is the experience of so many women across time and across cultures. Prejudice against women was alive and well in relationships, in professional life, in public and political spheres, and yet Hannah persisted. And woman after woman struggled with laws and social and religious teachings that would tell us that they are less than others. That to try to control and shame women, that focus more on what they look like than what they say or do, and that make their worth dependent upon something other than who they were. Hannah was an extraordinary woman. Even if she hadn't finally gotten pregnant and given birth to Samuel, she was already an extraordinary woman of kindness and faith and patience and strength. Whew. Aren't you glad those problems that women faced back then are no longer around? Guess that's not so true, huh? Problems still persist. Seems that when women step into leadership roles and institutions that have been traditionally dominated by men, whether that's in the field of science or engineering or finance or church, there can be a tremendous pressure placed on the old ways of doing things and about assumptions, about networks. Women fighting back against the empire. And one thing we all know, the empire will always strike back. Power and privilege and the comfort of the status quo are rarely voluntarily surrendered. When those who have been previously ignored present themselves for service as worthy participants, they find that they're not welcomed. Now, people who are wronged can react with hurtful speech or bruising actions, but Hannah chose a different path. She persisted in her faith, not joyfully, not blindly, not without grief, but with a sense that the God who had led the Israelites out of slavery, through the wilderness, and into the promised land would also be with her in her barren place and lead her to a new life. Our passage today from Mark is a short passage in which Jesus speaks of the end times and of many things that will happen. Jesus says, but beware that no one leads you astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place. But the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquake in various places. There will be famines. This is the beginning of the birth pangs. Now, what strikes me about that is when this was written. It was written around the year 60 AD. So it's old. And there have been wars and wars and wars and countless earthquakes and famine throughout the years. The birth pangs seem to be lasting a very long time. In Hannah's life, how long did Hannah wait? She had no guarantee that anything would change in her lifetime, that her circumstances would ever change. The Israelites didn't know how long they would have to wander through the wilderness between their time of slavery and getting to the promised land. And we never know the duration of any moment of our personal suffering or struggle or grief. The only thing we know is that God is still at work. The Methodist prayer book says, "New every morning is your love, great God of light, and all day long you are working for good in the world." And because of that, we also pray that God will stir in us a desire to serve God, to live peacefully with our neighbors, and to devote each day to Jesus Christ our Lord. This is the persistence that comes with faith, through hope, through the love that fuels us to keep us pressing on regardless of the obstacles or the setbacks that we encounter. Back in January of 2016, Valerie Kaur, a lawyer, spoke at an interfaith watch night service that was organized in response to a series of hate crimes. Her core message, I think, speaks directly to our passages today. She said that night, "What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if all our grandfathers and grandmothers are standing behind us now, those who survived wars and occupations and genocide and slavery and Jim Crow? What if they're whispering in our ears, 'You are brave'? What if this is our nation's greatest transition? What does a midwife tell women to do? Breathe, and then what? Push. Because if you don't push, you'll die. Tonight we will breathe. Tomorrow we will labor in love." Our ancestor, Hannah, brings to us this kind of speech and faith and vision. Standing in faith, we can say, now this might be a stretch, but you can think of God as a midwife. Come what may, God is not going anywhere. God is right here, coaxing and soothing us, challenging us to push through the pain, to receive the new life that's available. God is holding us, the world, and all the people in his strong and capable hands as we hurt and grieve and fear, urging us to choose life instead of death, gentleness instead of violence, justice instead of greed, hope instead of despair. God pushes us to change in ways that will allow new life to be born in the world. God speaks words of encouragement, reminding us how strong we are, how loved we are, and how important we are. Having faith in a loving, steadfast, ever-present God doesn't mean that we'll get the outcome that we desire. It doesn't mean we won't have fear or doubt or be anxious or suffer. But it does allow us to bring all of these things into the larger vision of God's future. And when we do that, our suffering is given some meaning. Our hopes are given shape. And we're reminded of who we are and what we can do. That namely, we are children of God, no matter how long the birth pangs last. May God grant us the grace to do that. In the name of the Father, and the